check. Sorry about the pinball machine, it's going to make noise.
Not sorry about the pinball machine.
Yeah, no, I feel good about the pinball machine.
All right, should we start?
Yeah,
Sure.
Good.
All right, my name's Mark Kleeb.
Hi, I'm Andy Wallace.
I'm Dustin Long.
We are part of an organization in New York called Death by Audio Arcade. We usually make arcade cabinets, but we decided to be insane and build a pinball machine. So it took about 2 years, and we're going to talk about why and how we did that. All right, so just to preface a little bit of history, from 2004 to 2014, there was a place in Brooklyn called Death by Audio. Oliver Ackerman, who's playing tonight in A Place with Buried Strangers, started by building guitar pedals for his friends. And they got a warehouse in Brooklyn. A couple of years later, they rented more space and turned it into a venue. And from about 2006 to 2014, they had shows, I want to say 5-6 days a week. A lot of bands played there. And so I moved in 2009. 13 people lived in the back, and everyone was sort of a musician, artist, fabricator. And I had the idea to put arcade cabinets in the back of the venue. And we realized that there were a lot of people in New York building indie games, and they kind of went along with indie music, and so it kind of turned into a thing. And so the Death by Audio Arcade started. These are a couple different machines we've built. We only build machines for indie games. We don't do any old games, so everything's new, everything's custom.
And the designers of the game are always included in the build process, so it's all like very tightly interwoven that way.
Yeah, so we like to involve the community in how we build things. And to this date, we've built something like 25 custom arcade machines. And right now they're all over New York. Death by Audio closed in 2014, so we've sort of been this nomadic band of arcade cabinets. We've showcased at the Maker Faire that's out in Flushing Meadows, Cronin Park, Low Level Festival, the Smithsonian American Art Museum in DC, MagFest. And so a lot of what we do is put all of our arcade cabinets on a box truck and drive them to a place and set them up for events. In 2014, we applied to become a 501c3 nonprofit, and we got that status about a year later. And so now we have a membership drive, and so we have people who can donate money to us, and we have membership tiers that you can get free tickets to our events. And so this year we've been doing partnerships with lots of different venues around New York, Elsewhere, Cloud City, Flat Tops, the Dream House, Our Wicked Lady, and Super Chief Gallery, just to name a few. It's a lot.
Just a couple.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. Anything else to say about the arcade?
Well, yeah, so I think a lot of what we're trying to do is there is this big resurgence in arcades in general, but a lot of that is very much based in looking back and playing the games that people really enjoyed playing in the 80s, and that's super exciting and good, but something that is kind of lacking from that is a kind of like, well, what's next? What are we doing after this, and how can we bring kind of modern sensibilities and just new art into the mix there? And I think that's become a really big thing with us. Obviously, everything we're making is an original machine to begin with, but taking that same idea of there is this real spark of joy in playing old arcade games, but it's not just limited to things that people played as a kid.
Yeah, and for me, I was always interested in community spaces and how to bring people together in physical space. And I feel like games, a lot of the times, especially new games, only exist online or digitally. And so we always try to find games that are like multiplayer games that can bring people together in a music venue or an art space or a gallery, and that's sort of what we focus on.
Yeah, I think it made sense as far as how it got founded, that the social aspect around arcades was something that was kind of lost once arcades fell apart. And just like going to a show and seeing something in a public space is different than listening to something at home. Having an arcade, even one that is nomadic and moves around, it's still a great way to bring people together.
Yeah. So, that brings us to the pinball machine. So after building cabinets for a couple of years, I had this idea that I wanted to build an indie pinball machine. It felt like the natural progression of difficulty and, this impossibility that I was interested in. And this all started because I visited the Silver Ball Pinball Museum in Asbury Park, and I kept seeing these like rock and roll pinball machines around like AC/DC and Metallica and Iron Maiden. And my roommate at the time had this band, A Place to Bury Strangers, and their live shows were just like this sensory overload of stuff. There were smoke machines and lasers and strobe lights, and it was just like crushingly loud, and I wanted to see if you can recreate that experience in a pinball machine. So, this didn't happen until I got a call from a friend of mine in late 2016 who had been kind of hacking up this old 1959 Gottlieb Mademoiselle pinball machine. And he's like, I gotta move studios, I have to get this out of here, do you want it? And I thought, okay, this is perfect. Like, I can buy this old machine and we can finally start work on the A Place to Bury Strangers pinball machine. However, it was in pretty terrible shape. In the 50s, pinball machines were entirely electromechanical, so there were no circuit boards in them. Like when you hit a switch, it just fired a magnet to make the bumpers work. And also, a lot of the wires had been cut, a lot of the parts were rusted. So I had been working with another electrical engineer, and we just were like, let's just throw all this away and start from scratch.
Some of them were literally melting.
Yeah, it was a mess. I had to rebuild a couple of the legs. The box was not reinforced, so it took a lot of work just to get this thing standing on 4 legs again. So even though it was kind of a cool piece of art, we wanted to do something entirely different. So we painted the whole playfield, and then I reached out to an artist that I knew who had actually founded Death by Audio with Oliver, and I asked him to paint the playfield. And so Joe Jurowitz, who was an animator I knew on shows like Super Jail, he did this really amazing playfield artwork, and I think it's really perfect for what we wanted to do with it. So once we had that done, we decided to start replacing all of the bumpers and everything. We wanted everything to be a little more thematic. It was sort of this weird circus rainbow theme. And so we went with a black, white, and red kind of theme. And then instead of like the score circles in the middle, Oliver's company, Death by Audio, manufactures guitar pedals, and we took little pieces of imagery from the guitar pedals and laser cut it into those inserts. And then we backlit it with LED lighting. So we were able to do kind of cool LED animations. Then there were the bumpers. These pieces are called solenoids. They're essentially magnets that when you give them power, they turn the magnet on and like pull a rod down. And when we tested them, they worked, but what we kept finding was that they would stick, and then all the circuitry we were testing on would start melting. It took about 6 months for us to just be like, you know what, this is not worth it. Let's just replace them. And so luckily we found a place that had replacement parts for almost everything on this machine, and we bought a whole new set of these coils. And then I was talking with a lot of people on a forum about the best way to wire these up, and I got this circuit, which essentially was like, this will protect everything so that you don't melt your circuitry. So this was really helpful. And so I started making circuitry for the machine. I have a custom circuit board machine, which was really helpful because there ended up being 6 custom circuit boards that I had to make for this. And so this was a circuit board I made for just those magnetic coils, which worked for a little bit until I realized the power was actually melting the circuit board. They were drawing a lot of power. I had to reinforce all of those traces. But eventually, we got it to a point where it worked. I had to make another board for the LEDs. So this is another custom board that I made just to drive the LEDs. And this is what the underside of the machine looked like after we got all of the circuitry working.
Beautiful.
So, in layman's terms, there are 4 small, like USB-powered microcontrollers that are hooked into a computer. and they're all controlling different aspects of the pinball machine. And this is what it looks like on the inside. We took out all of the old machinery, and there's a couple different power supplies and a fog machine sitting in there. It's just like a big, nice storage container for all this stuff. And then there was all the stuff I had thought about originally, like the fog machine, the strobe lights, the lasers. These were all just things you could plug into the wall. And so we needed a way to turn those on and off. And so these are super high power relays, which just means they can turn on regular outlets. So we got 5 of them wired up, and we're able to turn these outlets on and off, which allows us to turn the strobes and lasers on and off. The fog machine was a little more tricky because you can't just turn a fog machine on and off because it has to heat up a little bit. So there was a button controller that came with the fog machine that I just cracked open and wired that up to a relay. That's the far left one. And now we're able to kind of simulate pushing the fog machine button to turn the fog on and off.
It's basically always on. You're just pressing a button.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a super fast run through of like about 14 months of that. And then I wanted to do a really cool piece of art for the marquee, so I reached out to Preston Spurlock, who's this really amazing New York artist, and he did this amazing piece for the backboard, but we also knew that we wanted things embedded in here, like...
real quick, important thing about Preston also, he had done art at Death by Audio on like the walls. So he had another connection to the old space, the old venue.
Yeah.
Kind of tied it together.
And he had done some flyers for us in the past, and he does a lot of art all around New York for shows, so his stuff's real good. So we wanted like this scoreboard to be on these really cool vacuum tubes, and like a little screen to be embedded in there so we could play some Strangers videos. So when we mounted this, we kind of cut out little holes so we could mount all of that stuff. And we also put LED strips behind this so it had like a cool backlight behind it.
Which you can see now.
Yeah, you can see it from here.
Shooting lasers.
So once we got everything wired up, we had to sort of design software to make it all talk together. So I'll let you guys talk about this part.
Yeah, so early on, while Mark was still hammering in a lot of hardware, I knew that we were going to have game logic behind this, and that it was going to be a while before we could test it meaningfully. So something I did early on was we had this kind of diagram of the thing. I assigned ID numbers to everything, and I wrote a C++ application that just used the mouse as a ball, and it was just enough that we could start thinking about what the actual game logic would be. And then once Dustin started working on the actual architecture that would run inside the brain, he rigged it such that it could fake messages that would normally go to the various microcontrollers and instead could be picked up by my simulator so that we could test not on the hardware.
Yeah, so from working on some previous hardware projects, I knew that it's a real pain to have to go to a site and like plug your computer into some physical machine in order to see if your code was working correctly. Like it means that you can't work remotely, you can't be like somewhere else, try something out. You have to actually be there to verify what's going on. So what we did is we had this nice separation where this big chunk of code was handling things like how score works, or when the fog machine turns on, or when the lasers turn on based upon what's being hit. And that chunk of code doesn't know if it's talking to the real pinball machine or if it's talking to the simulator that Andy wrote. That made it possible that we could kind of try things out, see what felt good, iterate quickly on it, like tweak things as we felt we needed to. So what you see here is an example of it working, where the mouse on the right is moving over bumpers and switches, and on the left it's just displaying messages in this isolated chunk that's saying what it thinks got hit.
And it is worth noting, when things are lighting up here, it's not the result of the mouse doing something here. The mouse hits this, sends the message to the brain does whatever it's doing, and then sends a message back to make everything happen.
Yeah, so there's this round trip that it tells you that it's working correctly.
Yeah.
And then the theory is you take that part out and you hook it up to the real pinball machine, you see the exact same lights lighting up, and it's, you kind of need to see that.
Because there is, so much of this is about the kind of like sensory overload and like just things bouncing around, but there does need to be some underlying game logic and a few different reliable mechanics to make the machine feel like a real playable machine.
And go ahead.
Kind of just to build on what Andy was saying, like there's little goals of things you can do in order to make things happen, right? And like once you kind of realize how it all works, it means that you're playing the machine not just to see balls bounce around, hit things, which is fun, and not just to see things go off, but because you know you have some control over it, and you know kind of hopefully feel engaged.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
In brief, what do you mean by game logic?
Sure. So, for instance, we have all these bouncers and bumpers, and one of the things we did is the top 5 will toggle on. So it's kind of a mini goal. If you hit all 5 of those, they'll stay lit up until you hit all 5, and then you get a big effect. Mm-hmm. Or like in here, we have this bullseye, and if you hit that, it lights this up. If you hit it again, now it lights 2 up. And so you kind of have a build up here. So it's not anything super complex. Those rounds don't last very long. But there are little goals in there and things that you can progress with.
I think if you're familiar with like pinball machines that are mass manufactured, there's always some like hit like these 5 things and something happens, like something pops out of the ground or like something spins around. Okay. And so we didn't have a lot to work with because in the 50s they didn't really have any of that. So we had to use these external things like strobe lights and fog machines to be the like prize or like the thing that was the payoff, right? And so even just like wiring this all up so it worked was cool and like everything turned on, but having it be gamified so it's like, okay, I know I'm gonna try and like hit these certain things, it gives you more of like a feeling of accomplishment.
There's also a lot of logic that even goes into what's commonly called game feel. So there's a sense that when you're playing it, even if they're not things that affect it mechanically, getting response from the machine makes everything feel bigger. So just things like when we hit the side here, there is a logic to it that when you hit this, there's a little arc that happens with those lights. And it's not just flashing randomly.
And like sound effects and things like that too, yeah.
So all of those go into the logic of the machine.
And so we didn't really know what we were going to use for the brain for hardware, right? I always thought it was going to be like a beefy tower computer because there was going to be a lot of processing. And so we talked about it, and I had computers called Raspberry Pis, which are like these little $40 like mini computers that they don't have a lot of processing power, but we were like, let's see if we can do it on this. And so we got a USB hub, we plugged all the controllers into that, and the Raspberry Pi ran great, so we never really swapped it out. So all of this whole program is running on this little $40 computer that's like the size of a credit card, and it's been great.
Which is also cool because it makes it more like the old machines where they were, you know, minimal cost, just like pared down little tiny things making everything happen.
And it makes it a lot easier to move.
Yeah, it's very light. So while all the software was happening, there were a few finishing touches that we wanted to do. So we wanted to cover these bumpers, and so Andy and I went through like old circuit diagrams and purely aesthetic. We were like, which of these look cool? So I also had access to a laser cutter. So what we did was we just kind of laser cut these images, spray painted them black, and then peeled off the excess tape. And that's how we did these designs. And these were all frosted so that like they made this nice diffusion on top. These 2 eyes in the middle, on the original machine, those were just holes where you lost a ball, which really sucked. It was a really bad aspect of the original machine. So those eyes are actually the album cover for the new A Place for Very Strangers album, pinned. And so I kind of just duplicated it and put those in. We wanted the ball to glow in the dark, but we had no way of making that look good. So I installed black lights along the side so that it kind of made that glow in the dark work a little better. And then we also
it just looks cool.
Yeah. And then we hooked it up to another relay, so we were able to turn the black lights on and off if we needed to. And so this was the video that we took. This was about a week ago, so we've made a little bit of improvements. But this is sort of like the finished, 95% finished project. So yeah, it's free to play. All of our machines, we don't charge for them. We don't have coin slots on them. And because it's free to play, it's just one ball. So your one ball keeps score. When you lose that ball, the score back goes down to 0. So it's super simple. And yeah, this is the first time we've brought it out in public.
There might be problems with it. Might be some bugs. Sorry.
Yeah, but that's about it. There's probably a lot that we didn't talk about. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, let us know.
Can you tilt the machine? Because the ball got caught on the side real quick. We could do a little jostle.